Every single day, you are being lied to. It happens in boardrooms, at dining tables, in quiet corridors, and across polished negotiation desks. But the deception isn't the problem. The real problem is that you are listening to the wrong channel. We live in a world that is fundamentally obsessed with words. We analyze speeches, we dissect text messages, and we agonize over what people say to us. We treat spoken language as the ultimate source of human truth. But if you look closely at the turning points of human history, at the empires that fell to an internal betrayal, the brilliant deals negotiated in absolute silence, and the psychological masters who could see through a person within 3 seconds of meeting them, you discover a chilling reality. Words are not designed to reveal the truth. Words are designed to conceal it. Why do some people desperately need to be liked? Why do they compromise their values, change their posture, and alter their opinions the moment someone else enters the room? Conversely, why do the most influential leaders often seem entirely indifferent to approval? Why does their lack of validation-seeking behavior instantly command a room, while others scream for attention and receive only pity? What if the need for validation isn't a personality trait at all, but a primal, misplaced survival instinct? What if the very mechanism we use to connect with others is actually an open invitation for them to control us? Why are we biologically driven to reveal our vulnerabilities to the exact people who can use them to destroy us? While the masses are easily hypnotized by eloquent promises and carefully rehearsed smiles, an elite class of strategists throughout history operated on an entirely different frequency. They understood that human beings are locked in a permanent, unconscious conflict. We desperately try to present a specific image to the world, yet our biology, our history, and our deepest fears are constantly working against us. Every person you meet is actively leaking their truest intentions, their hidden vulnerabilities, and their darkest motivations. They are broadcasting an invisible language every single second. Most people walk through life completely blind to this transmission. They mistake a loud voice for confidence, a firm handshake for honesty, and a pleasant demeanor for loyalty. They are chess players who only look at the piece their opponent just moved, completely oblivious to why their hand is shaking as they release it. This raises a profound question. If words are merely a smokescreen, how do you bypass the illusion? How did the greatest minds in history look past the social masks of their peers and read their true intentions like an open book? To understand this invisible language, we must first look at a subtle glitch in human interaction. Think about the last time you met someone who felt incredibly charming, yet left you with an inexplicable knot in your stomach. Your conscious mind heard perfect phrases, but your primitive nervous system detected a hidden anomaly. You were picking up on a behavioral mismatch, a slight delay between a spoken word and a microscopic shift in posture, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, or a tone of voice that subtly contradicted the message. Psychologists refer to this as emotional leakage. The human brain is a highly complex machine, but it possesses a critical design flaw. The areas responsible for conscious speech are completely separate from the evolutionary networks that control our survival instincts and emotional responses. You can consciously choose to say a lie, but you cannot easily command your autonomic nervous system to suppress the microscopic stress of telling it. Human beings are literally incapable of complete deception. We are walking diaries, continuously writing our secrets into the air through the tilt of our heads, the pacing of our breath, the tension in our jaws, and the strategic positioning of our bodies. The elite strategist does not argue with the words a person uses. They treat words as a defensive shield, and instead they look at where the shield is being held. They recognize that we overshare our truest nature precisely when we think we are hiding it best. This is the starting point of our investigation. To read people like a strategist is not about playing parlor tricks or guessing card games. It is about developing an architectural understanding of human nature. It is about pulling back the curtain on the social theater we all participate in. But this initial discovery leaves us on the edge of a far deeper, more volatile mystery. If people are constantly leaking their internal state, what exactly is the source of that leakage? To find out, our investigation must move from the surface of daily behavior and descend into the absolute darkest depths of the human unconscious mind. To unlock the hidden blueprints of human behavior, we must examine the brilliant architecture of the mind mapped out by the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Jung realized that the human psyche is permanently divided against itself. He discovered that every individual carries a profound duality. On one hand, we have the persona, the psychological mask we carefully craft and wear for society. The persona is the ideal worker, the loyal friend, the perfectly composed leader, or the deeply agreeable partner. It is the carefully curated version of ourselves we broadcast to win applause, avoid conflict, and secure validation. But Jung discovered that the more pristine and perfect a person's persona appears, the darker and more volatile the hidden side becomes. He called this hidden hemisphere the shadow. The shadow is the psychological basement where we lock away everything society tells us is unacceptable. Our raw ambitions, our deep-seated insecurities, our envy, our past traumas, and our unvarnished desires. Most people spend their entire lives pretending their shadow does not exist. They believe they have successfully buried it. But the strategist knows a fundamental rule of psychological gravity. Whatever is suppressed internally will inevitably manifest externally. This brings us to Jung's most devastating revelation, a concept known as psychological projection. Because the human mind cannot bear the pain of looking directly at its own hidden flaws, it unconsciously projects those very flaws onto the people around them. Jung observed that what irritates us most in others is almost always an unacknowledged aspect of our own hidden nature. When a person is intensely paranoid about betrayal, it is often because their own unconscious mind is a harbor of deceitful desires. When an insecure leader accuses everyone else of being incompetent, they are desperately trying to externalize their own profound fear of inadequacy. The strategist listens to a person's criticisms not as an evaluation of the victim, but as an absolute, involuntary confession of the speaker's own shadow. This is why human beings are constantly exposing their deepest secrets. They cannot help it. Their fears and insecurities are continuously leaking through their social mask. For example, a person with a deep fear of abandonment will often preemptively sabotage a relationship or overanalyze every minor pause in a conversation. A person obsessed with status will constantly drop names or subtly diminish the achievements of their peers, revealing an agonizingly fragile self-worth. They believe their persona is flawless, but their shadow is constantly stepping out from behind the curtain, speaking loudly to anyone who knows how to look. By understanding the relationship between the persona and the shadow, the strategist stops reacting to the performance and begins analyzing the performer. They do not get distracted by the loud, aggressive display of a bully. They recognize it as a desperate psychological armor designed to hide a terrified child within. They do not automatically trust the overly saintly, perfectly agreeable colleague. They watch for the subtle, passive-aggressive slips that reveal a boiling reservoir of resentment. But this discovery leaves our investigation with a massive strategic riddle. If understanding the human mind allows you to see through an individual, how do you scale this skill up to survive a world filled with active deception? How do you use pattern recognition to navigate hyper-competitive landscapes where people are actively trying to destroy you? To find out, we must travel back across the centuries to the ancient battlefields of the Far East. We step back over 2,000 years into the chaotic, brutal landscape of ancient China during the Warring States period. Here, where survival was determined entirely by the speed of one's intellect, a military philosopher named Sun Tzu forged a philosophy of observation that would dictate the nature of strategy for millennia. In his immortal text, The Art of War, Sun Tzu laid down a law that forms the very foundation of strategic intelligence. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. But how did Sun Tzu's generals map an enemy they could not see? They did it by abandoning all assumptions and dedicating themselves to absolute, patient pattern recognition. Sun Tzu understood that human beings are creatures of intense habit. No matter how clever a rival general might be, their strategic decisions are always governed by their emotional temperament. A general who is naturally impetuous can be easily provoked into a reckless attack. A general who is deeply arrogant can be easily blinded by flattery. A general who is overly cautious can be frozen in place by an illusion of overwhelming force. To read people like an ancient strategist requires the cultivation of supreme emotional control and radical patience. A distracted, emotional mind is completely incapable of accurate observation. If you are angry, if you are eager to impress, or if you are terrified of losing, your mind will project its own biases onto the person in front of you. You will see what you hope to see, or what you fear to see, rather than reality. Sun Tzu taught that a master strategist must become entirely formless and perfectly still, like a deep pool of mountain water. Only when your own mind is completely calm can it accurately reflect the true nature of the adversary. From this state of stillness, the strategist does not look for single isolated actions. They look for anomalies in established patterns. They establish a behavioral baseline for everyone they interact with. They observe how a person acts when they are under no pressure, their normal speech rate, their natural posture, their casual eye contact. Once that baseline is locked in, the strategist introduces a strategic stressor, a pointed question, a sudden change in terms, or a prolonged, uncomfortable silence. They then watch, with predatory focus, for the variance. Does the vocal pitch rise slightly? Does the foot begin to tap under the table? Does the eye contact suddenly break? Sun Tzu's strategy relies on the truth that a person's true character is never revealed in moments of comfort. It is exposed under the pressure of the unexpected. By quietly mapping these behavioral baselines and watching for the subtle fractures when stress is applied, ancient generals could predict an enemy's movements days before the army even marched. But this leaves us on the precipice of a darker revelation. If this tool can be used to defend an empire, how did the ruthless political architects of the West use it to build absolute, unquestioned authority over their own people? Our investigation now moves from the misty battlefields of ancient Asia to the opulent, cutthroat courts of Renaissance Europe. Here, in the heart of Florence, a diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli meticulously observed the dark arts of statecraft. He saw that power is rarely a matter of raw physical force. It is, almost exclusively, an illusion maintained through the careful curation of perception. In his infamous treatise, The Prince, Machiavelli outlined a chillingly pragmatic truth. The masses are always taken by appearances. A ruler who speaks too much, who is too accessible, and who constantly explains his reasoning invariably appears common, insecure, and easily understood. Familiarity breeds contempt. The more you explain yourself, the more you lower your stature to the level of those you wish to lead or influence. The masters of political intelligence rarely justify their actions. They understand that authority is built on an unbreakable aura of mystique. When a powerful leader issues a directive and refuses to engage in unnecessary debates or defensive explanations, they signal absolute certainty. They imply that their reasoning is operating on a level far above the comprehension of ordinary men. Think of the highest stakes negotiations of our time. The individual who dominates the room is rarely the one doing the most talking. The one who truly dominates is the one who speaks last, who allows everyone else to exhaust their arguments, expose their vulnerabilities, and deplete their energy. By maintaining an impenetrable stillness, they preserve their aura of absolute control. They understand the heavy permanence of sound. Once a word leaves your lips, you can never take it back. It becomes the property of your enemies. But this uncovers a critical paradox in our investigation. If keeping your cards close to your chest is the key to dominating others, how do you prevent the internal chaos of your own emotions from breaking through your mask? To find the missing link, we must travel to the cold, brutal, freezing northern frontier of the Roman Empire, where the most powerful man in the Western world sat completely alone in his military tent. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome and a devout Stoic philosopher, ruled over an empire facing catastrophic plague, endless rebellion, and devastating economic collapse. Yet, inside his mind, there was an unnatural, untouchable stillness. He did not write his private journals, the legendary texts we now know as the Meditations, to impress an audience. He wrote them as a psychological survival guide. Marcus Aurelius spoke frequently of the inner citadel, an impenetrable fortress within the mind where no external event, no betrayal, and no catastrophe could penetrate unless the individual voluntarily opened the gates. He realized that the noise of the world is entirely neutral. Events are just events. It is our internal commentary, our frantic emotional reactions, our endless complaining that transform external events into personal suffering. When the world around you is chaotic, the natural human impulse is to scream back at the chaos. We want to vent, to rage against injustice, to declare our victimhood. But Aurelius recognized that this internal noise only weakens the spirit. True self-control begins with the silencing of the internal dialogue. It is the rare ability to observe a crisis without immediately attaching a hysterical emotional narrative to it. By cultivating an internal stillness, you create a space between the stimulus and your response. In that fraction of a second, you cease to be a puppet of your emotions and you become the master of your fate. Our investigation now transitions into the clinical, high-stakes world of modern behavioral science. In the late 20th century, a pioneering psychologist named Paul Ekman achieved a breakthrough that forever altered our understanding of human deception. Ekman discovered something extraordinary. Regardless of culture, geography, or upbringing, all human beings share the exact same neurological programming when it comes to expressing core emotions. The human face is wired to 74 separate muscles, and when we experience a profound spike of fear, anger, guilt, or joy, those muscles fire automatically. This is where the science of micro-expressions begins. A micro-expression is a full, involuntary facial expression that flashes across a person's face for a fraction of a second, often lasting just 1/25th of a second. It happens completely outside of the person's conscious awareness. A corrupt politician or a dishonest business partner can spend hours rehearsing a statement in front of a mirror, mastering their vocal tone and their deliberate smiles. But the moment they are asked a highly volatile, unexpected question, the true emotion, whether it is a flash of intense anger or a flicker of sheer panic, will violently leak onto their face before their conscious brain can intercept and suppress it. However, modern psychology warns against a dangerous amateur mistake. No single micro-expression, gesture, or twitch is an absolute proof of a lie. There is no universal Pinocchio nose effect. Shifting one's eyes can mean deception, but it can also simply mean deep creative thought, intense social anxiety, or a memory retrieval process. A true strategist never relies on an isolated sign. Instead, they look for what behavioral scientists call clusters and incongruences. A cluster is a combination of at least 3 separate behavioral signals occurring simultaneously or in rapid succession. For instance, if a person is asked about a missing financial file and they verbally answer no, while their head gives a microscopic nod, their hand moves to touch their neck, and their breathing rate suddenly increases, you have captured a cluster of high cognitive dissonance. The conscious mind is trying to project a persona of innocence, but the body is screaming a message of intense internal stress. The strategist notes this cluster not as an immediate reason to attack, but as an absolute marker of where the hidden truth is buried. This brings our investigation back to the present day. The battlefields of Sun Tzu, the courts of Machiavelli, and the fortresses of Marcus Aurelius have now converged into a single, hyper-connected, relentlessly noisy arena, the modern digital world. Today, we are told that to be relevant, we must constantly broadcast. Social media algorithms are literally designed to exploit our psychological discomfort with an empty space. They reward the immediate, the emotional, and the outraged reaction. They monetize our desperate need for external validation. As a result, we have become a society that is highly reactive, but profoundly, dangerously weak. We have traded the strategic depth of the silent mind for the cheap thrill of immediate visibility. But even today, underneath the digital noise, the fundamental rules of human psychology discovered by the ancient masters have not changed one bit. In the modern workplace, in business, and in relationships, a deliberate pause remains the ultimate differentiator. The person who cannot stop talking reveals their desperate need for approval. They tell the world exactly how to manipulate them. Conversely, the professional who uses stillness deliberately commands an unnatural amount of respect. When they finally speak, their words are treated not as background noise, but as rare currency. In a toxic argument, refusing to engage breaks the cycle of conflict entirely, communicating a devastating message: I am not controlled by your noise. We began this investigation looking for a hidden habit of history's greatest minds, and we have found something far more profound. This withholding of speech is not an emptiness, a lack of substance, or a failure to communicate. It is the dense, heavy, raw material from which all true power, strategic genius, and self-mastery are forged. The world will continue to demand your attention. It will try to convince you that if you are quiet, you will be forgotten. But remember the ancient secret of the masters: the loudest rooms are always filled with the weakest men. True strength does not need to shout. It rests in the knowledge that the most profound word you can ever speak is the one you choose to keep to yourself. The next time the world demands your reaction, give it nothing, and watch how the balance of power shifts entirely in your direction.